Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing schools and delinquency. But again, in order to open up this chapter, we need to do a quick overview of the sociology of education. So, when we're thinking about the education system, we can apply a functionalist perspective. Like, what's the purpose of the education system? The purpose of the education system is to socialize you and to teach you skills to fill social roles that are unequally distributed. But again, the key on the end, unequally distributed. Imagine society is kind of like a pyramid. You got a few people on top, a few more in the middle, and the most kind of toward the bottom, right? So the education system is filtering you into these roles. So if we apply conflict theory, we can look at how does the education system create inequality between groups, disparities between groups, and again, what you find is the kids that go to the good schools, they tend to take those elite social roles, and the kids that go to the not so good schools, their outcomes for life tend to involve less life chances. They tend to have less opportunities for educational access and success, job prestige, wealth, and other forms of social or cultural capital, okay? So again, and then to make it even more complicated, where your parents' socioeconomic status, where your parents are located in this class system, what social class your parents are located in, that's the main predictor of educational success. So again, last time we talked about things like poverty and how is poverty associated with delinquency. But again, poverty results in less life chances, less access to getting skills, to getting socialized into the quality of knowledge that you need to be able to fulfill elite social roles, or having the money to go to college, or any of these basic things. Um, and so you can see that crime increases as, more in the lower classes, is higher in the lower classes than it is in other social classes. And again, you got to ask why. But, that's because they have less access, less opportunities. So often you might turn to a life of crime, for example, if you can't go the traditional route by getting a job and making enough money to pay for your family. And so you have to think about things like that. So when we're going to be talking about schools, we also can apply symbolic interactionist theory in the sense that we're the ones who developed this system. We're the ones who built a capitalist economy where inequality results. We're the ones who have inequitable school funding. Like schools in high tax districts have so much more money because in their property taxes, people pay way more in these high tax districts, and the schools get so much more money than these poorer schools or the underfunded schools that don't have the resources, the quality teachers. So again, if the school system's all about teaching skill development and socializing them to fill lead jobs, not every kid is getting an equal opportunity to get access to that knowledge or the opportunities to go to college, for example, to be able to make a life like that. So again, when we're thinking about the education system, again, in juvenile delinquency, we're looking at, does the education system sometimes fail lower class kids? And the answer is absolutely yes. They're not getting the high quality of education they need to compete in the market. Okay. And so that increases rates of delinquency. And the other thing we're going to be talking about in this chapter is also how do things like trauma or troubled families, etc., equate to behavioral problems in school, not being able to buy into the system, whatever it might be. So that's also going to be the other side of it. We're going to be looking at the effects of poverty, inequitable schools, and how that's associated with delinquency. And then we'll also be looking at, the effects of trauma in one's life or the social context that might equate to not as positive school related behavior or inability to conform to the norms that are expected in the school environment or whatever it might be. Okay. So just to open up, schools statistically were like the safest place. You were far more likely to get shot in a restaurant or something like that than you are in schools. And schools, despite what these statistics are saying, are very safe places. However, in the last 5 or 6 years, you've seen a massive increase in school shootings when it comes to these mass shootings. So you should look at the statistics there. Just look them up online, and you'll be horrified because they've increased about 2,000%. But in 2017, it's a little outdated here, but this is what your book was quoting. 28 homicides and 17 suicides occurred in school. There were 750,000 non-fatal crimes. 10% of teachers experience being threatened, and they found that elementary teachers more than secondary teachers experience more threats. But why? Again, think about the behavioral problems and think about our ability to regulate and manage our emotions. When do we actually, psychologically, do we have that ability? So think about these kids, they might be going through some tough stuff, or they've learned some behavior that's not good, or maybe just they're having some, biological or physical psychological problems, and that can, get into this. Like my sister's a social worker, and for school, for the, kids in Nashville that just can't conform to that school system or experience a lot of violence and things, and she's constantly having to like restrain kids, take knives out of their hands. I mean, but what's going on with these kids? I mean, so many of their parents are drug addicts. So many of these kids are living 12 people to a bed. That's real stories. 12 people to a bed. All right, so not everyone has like this happy-go-lucky life. Okay? And then how does not having that happy-go life equate to engaging in things like crime and juvenile delinquency, substance abuse, violent acts, things along those lines? Again, it's complicated, that biopsychosocial approach. 11% of students reported seeing gangs in their schools, 12% of students reported being afraid, and overall, though, fighting has decreased in school. In general, crime has completely gone down. Teenagers don't commit crimes like they did in the 1990s. If you look at crime stats from the 1990s until now, it's gone down so much. However, there are still things that are going on, and having almost a million crimes in schools is quite significant, even if they're non-fatal crimes. School bullying, 2.7 million kids had experienced this, and 2.1 million are the school bullies. Cyberbullying can lead to depression, anxiety, or suicide. Your book talks about revenge for bullying as one of the strongest motivations for school shootings. 61% of students said they believe students shoot others at school because they have been victims of physical violence at school or at home. Those with disabilities are more likely to be bullied. That was so sad. And then the gifted experience the least. But again, if you look at stigma theory and you ask why, we stigmatize those with physical blemishes or personality traits or for race and ethnicity, things along those lines, parents' socioeconomic status. Bullying represents a form of youth violence. Bullying can include aggression that is physical, hitting or tripping, verbal, name calling or teasing, or relational social, meaning spreading rumors or leaving out a group. A young person can be a perpetrator, a victim, or both, also known as a bully victim. And again, people that experience bullying, do they learn that behavior and turn around? It's like kids that experience physical and sexual abuse. Do they learn that behavior and then turn around and do it themselves? And you tend to find those associations there. Again, it's just, you can look at like behaviorist theory or stimulus and response conditioning, and then people get conditioned into these behaviors. It's really dark and sad. Delinquency and school failure. As I'm saying, your school failure is a main predictor of whether or not somebody engages in juvenile delinquents acts or just crime in general. Again, it's all those things that I was saying in this introduction, is that if you can't get through the school system, it reduces your opportunity. Then you're also not conforming to the norms of the majority. That can result in forming subgroups, which your book is constantly talking about subgroups, whether it's gangs or whether it's just a culture of a bunch of potheads or whatever it might be. Going to school and doing well in school is associated with that. So your book says things like lack of academic achievement, low status at school, and dropping out are factors frequently cited as being related to involvement in delinquency. Again, the number one way to end poverty, education. You want to reduce crime, education, because they can get a job. They don't really turn to crime when they can get a job as much. You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds so basic and simple, but that's just the way it is. Both male and female delinquency is associated with poor academic achievement at school. So this is for both. And again, when we talked about females, for example, we talked about how trouble at the home, and then that resulting in trouble at school, then results in, leading to juvenile delinquency. These are the most important factors associated with why girls tend to lean toward juvenile delinquency. Delinquents' performance in school may be further affected by their relationship with classmates and teachers. Studies have concluded that the relationship between school performance and delinquency is mediated by peer influence. So again, having students and having friends that are all for school, pro school, spend their time doing school. But when you look at lower classes, do they stigmatize the kid that's spending all their time reading books? I mean, that's very stereotypical and generalizable, but again, think about educational values. Do educational values differ between social classes? And that's a hard question to answer, but the answer is yes. The higher you go up on the social class scale, the more expectations for school achievements the parents tend to have. Because maybe they have the money to put them to college, where poor parents know they can't put them in college, or for a variety of reasons, but this tends to be the case. And again, this is the association between culture, social class, and criminology. I mean, or just attitudes toward educational values. You tend to find that social class is associated with your cultural way of life, which is associated with how you spend your time and what you think is important and things along those lines. It's complicated. Okay? The relationship between social class and delinquency in school is that. People that tend to be lower class tend to have lower educational values for their children, and then, if they're not going to school and doing well, what are they going to do for skills? And again, it's a dark side of sociology, but it's this idea of social class reproduction. We reproduce the same social classes from generation to generation to maintain the status quo of society and to make sure that pyramid of social roles has been fulfilled, for example. Your book goes further and says, look, most kids don't want to be juvenile delinquents. They want to do well in school, but then they find themselves in these social contexts where the school is not good, they're not doing well, then they're getting exposed to a culture of poverty, for example, or a culture of a subgroup that is leading them down a dark path. And then that leads to less achievement in school, which then directly relates to delinquent behavior. Again, and so it's not, I mean, it's also like when I'm teaching psychology, it's complex because is intelligence associated with social class location? And the answer is yes. This is so sad. But again, your brain growth is dependent upon being challenged. According to Vygotskian theory, a kid's not going to become a rocket scientist until you push them. Okay, and so if you're not pushing these kids and motivating them and getting them to work really hard and spend time learning, they're not going to have the physical growth in their brain. Okay, and so again, what's the number one thing associated with intelligence, though? It's just basic nutrition. So poor kids aren't even getting enough food for their brain to grow. Again, so it's very complex, this relationship between social class and delinquency and the schools. And again, it has mixed support. Like, it's not just because you're poor doesn't mean you're not going to succeed, but it increases the likelihood of you not succeeding, which then increases the likelihood of you engaging in delinquent acts. Okay? So, Philip's steps leading to deviant behavior on this bottom here, this little graph, again, the type of school you go to, is it good or is it bad, somewhere in the middle, is directly associated with how they feel about school and their overall school. And then whether or not they're buying into the system and doing it right. If they're not buying into the system, then they buy into some other system, which might be something that could be labeled as a delinquent system or something that deviates from cultural norms, and here you know it, they're engaging in deviant behavior. Okay, so it can be claimed that school failure is directly related to delinquency. Those students who fail in school seek out peers who are also not succeeding in school. School failure brings disapproval from family, teachers, and the community, again furthering this psychosocial relationship between somebody engaging in crime and somebody choosing not to. And then school failure can create psychological problems for youth, and these negative self feelings can lead to delinquent acts. So not only does success affect your access to socioeconomic status and skills, but it also affects how you feel about yourself, your sense of self-worth, and your sense of self-competency, which can then feed into whether or not you even believe you can get a job. And then for school failure and delinquency, poverty, drugs, family disruption, and gangs tend to all also be associated with school failure. Okay, so even if your family's not in the upper class, I mean lower classes, what if your family is, there's sexual abuse and trauma and things like that in the family, and that's leading to school failure, and that's leading to teens doing delinquent acts. So again, I don't want to focus exclusively on this, on like the association between lower class schools and delinquency, but again, that's a huge thing that we need to be talking about. And then also, the school has a role in school failure. Is it up to society to take care of these kids? So again, if we're going to apply like an attribution theory from psychology, who do we blame? Is it the individual's fault for not picking themselves up from their bootstraps and getting it together despite all of the trauma and abuse and drugs they're exposed to and poverty and violence and all the other things? Or is it society's fault for letting kids fall behind? These are questions that we should always be asking. Okay, so again, relating to theories, we introduced the major sociological theories, but again, blocked opportunity theory. If you don't give somebody the skills, they don't have the access, so they're more likely to commit crime. Strain theory. They're not doing well in school, they're struggling, and then they just turn to a life of crime. Cultural deviance theory. Those that you're exposed to, the types of cultures you're exposed to, dictate the social norms that are acceptable. Social control theory. If the school's not doing a good job of socially controlling students, how is that affecting them? Labeling theory, in that if we label them deviants, they get caught in the system, all of a sudden they start to believe that's who they are and they start to live out that role. General theory of crime, that students have the ability to think about what they're doing and they have the executive function to make high quality decisions, and so, should we let them just get away with it? And then interactional theory is the idea that it's kind of like the community. If the community is looking out for people and trying to reduce crime, you're going to see much more positive results there. Just throw out a couple more. um, I like this chart. Children being pushed into prison, are things like foster care, less doing good in school, associated with whether or not you succeed. It talks about the effects of expelling students, arresting students, suspending students. Does that lead to graduation? Foster care, being caught in the juvenile justice system, being incarcerated, unemployment. Does that lead to juvenile delinquency? But again, delinquency across the life course, factors involved in dropping out of school. Again, what can we do for these people that fall through the cracks? Again, in my day, we had the No Child Left Behind thing, but that completely got dropped. Maybe it's just balancing out funding for schools. I don't know. I don't even. I'm not going to spend all day here talking about solutions for these problems, but school's failure influence status attainment at midlife, meaning that how well you do in school affects your life outcomes across your lifespan. It influences your socioeconomic status. It influences just so much across the life course, your access to health, how long you live. I mean, all of these things are associated with educational attainment. And it's weird. How long you live is because, look, you get through school, get yourself a good job, get some money, get access to health care. I mean, that's it. You get access to that good health care. That can prolong your life. It's as simple as that. Delinquency is linked to school failure through the lack of academic achievement, low social status at school, and dropping out of school. Dropping out of school influences later successes in life by reducing income, making jobs harder to attain, making it more likely to have to rely on welfare, and setting in motion later disadvantages in the transition into adulthood. Research has identified school interventions that hold promise for reducing delinquency. And again, just out of your book, I'm not going to, I'll put up my other lectures or check them out, my sociology of education lectures to get into solutions to how to fix these problems. But your book suggests these include improving school experiences, mentoring relationships, alternative schools, positive school community relationships, school-based violence prevention programs, and interventions to reduce school dropout. So again, this is just a quick run through, and hopefully we're looking at, these variables associated with why people end up committing crimes, how much of it's poverty, how much of it's trouble at the home life, how much of it's your psychosocial decisions, how much of it's low access, low achievement in schools, how much of it's culture and the people that you're around, you're exposed to. So again, we're introducing a bunch of variables. Hopefully it's getting more and more complicated as we go, because that's it. I mean, to explain why people engage in delinquent acts, to explain the patterns of behavior, it's complicated and it involves thinking about tons and tons of variables. So, game on. See you soon.